Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this third day of our this year's. Thank you very much to those who have been following us yesterday and the day before yesterday. Thank you very much for engaging in the debates, in the discussions, in our reflections. Thank you to the speakers and the panelists. And for now, I'd like to invite to the introductory remarks and welcome word Volodymyr Turchinovsky, the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and someone who is in charge of that conference for the inspiration for us for today. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to everyone. I'm really very happy to welcome and to greet you all. I was thinking of what image would fit best when thinking of the conference, and I wasn't able to come up with something better than a journey. I think this is what exactly this conference is. It is a journey. We are traveling through time. This is our third day of the conference, and there is still one day ahead of us tomorrow, and we are traveling through space as well, from one city to the other city, from one continent to a different continent, as well as you, our viewers who are watching this conference and participating in this conference from very different places and locations throughout the whole world. Very warm welcome to all of you. I hope, I know in fact that you are also enjoying this travel. We had, I believe, an excellent day yesterday with very insightful presentations. I was particularly happy with the students of the Faculty of Social Sciences who did their presentations yesterday, and these were ethics, politics, and economics students, as well as the students of our School of Public Administration, and excellent contributions on the both parts. And we had a fantastic panel from our colleagues from the Angelicum yesterday as well, and very deep and profound thoughts we heard in an interview which we had with Austin Ivory yesterday evening. So that was a very full day, and for those of you who didn't have a chance to watch all of this, I very cordially invite you to the conference webpage, where we post all the materials which will be available for all of you, so you can certainly take advantage of the ideas, thoughts expressed at the conference. And today we have another excellent day full of very interesting speakers and presentations. We will have the students of our law school sharing with us their thoughts, ideas, and skills. We are very much looking forward to a presentation from Notre Dame, from our colleagues and partners. We are awaiting another interview, which Jose Casanova will take and will be interviewing Catherine Marshall this evening. And certainly we are very much kind of looking forward to another panel on human rights, followed by Lviv Lab format, another kind of very innovative format which we introduce with our partners from Tvoje Misto and Lviv Lab as a part of this conference. So I'm wishing you all the best. Enjoy this kind of intellectual feast, and please do have some kind of emotion attached to it, as we all humans would love to do. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the program.
So step by step, we begin to unfold that wonderful and astonishing picture just outlined by Professor Turchinovsky, and we start with another panel offered by the students of UKU, particularly of UKU Law School, on the legitimacy and permissibility of the restrictions of human rights in the times of the COVID pandemic. So for the next hour and a half, if I'm not mistaken, I'm turning it over to Taras Leshkovich, who is the senior lecturer of UKU Law School, and his students.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, viewers. I'm extremely happy to convene this third day of our annual conference on integral human development in the digital age. And today we will begin with the mock parliamentary debates, as was already mentioned, on the quite relevant topic, especially in Ukraine, on the permissibility and legitimacy of restricting human rights due to COVID pandemics. This is indeed a relevant topic for Ukraine, where a series of restrictions have been imposed since March 2020, and in most cases with hardly any public or political debate. The quarantine measures imposed by the governmental regulations were heavily criticized by some of Ukrainian human rights organizations. The issue was even submitted to the Constitutional Court's consideration. However, the court quite conveniently avoided deciding this issue on the merits and closed this aspect of constitutional appeal regarding the constitutionality of human rights restriction on procedural grounds. There was not much of a debate in the parliament, either in March when the initial lockdown was imposed or later during the subsequent amendments to the legislation. As reported by the Singh Global Health Organization, while the COVID challenge is undeniably a serious threat that required a rapid and strong response, we need to ensure that states do not normalize oppressive surveillance and undermine human rights. The WHO declaration of the coronavirus as a global pandemic on March 11 prompted many countries to announce a state of emergency, thus opening the door for governments to exercise extraordinary powers. A UN policy paper titled COVID-19 and Human Rights, We Are All in This Together, released back in April 2020, also emphasizes that human rights are key in shaping the pandemic response, both for the public health emergency and the broader impact on people's livelihoods and lives. Human rights put people center stage. Responses that are shaped by and respect human rights result in better outcomes in beating the pandemic, ensuring healthcare for everyone and preserving human dignity. But they also focus our attention on who is suffering most, why, and what can be done about it. They prepare the ground now for emerging from this crisis with more equitable and sustainable societies, development, and peace. The world is facing an unprecedented crisis. At its core is a global public health emergency on a scale not seen for a century, requiring a global response with far-reaching consequences for our economic, social, and political lives. The priority is to save lives. In view of the exceptional situations and to preserve life, countries had no choice but to adopt extraordinary measures. Extensive lockdowns adopted to slow transmission of the virus, restrict by necessity freedom of movement, and in the process freedom to enjoy many other human rights. Such measures can inadvertently affect people's livelihoods and security, their access to healthcare, not only for COVID-19, to food, water, and sanitation, etc. Measures need to be taken to mitigate any such unintended consequences. Having said that, and without taking much more of your time, our today's mock parliamentary debates will focus exactly on this issue. To what extent and in what way can the state restrict human rights in order to combat the spread of the virus and save lives? So according to the rules of our debates, Ukraine is currently in the process of deciding on adopting new quarantine measures to combat the spread of the coronavirus disease. There are two factions within the parliament. The majority coalition, consisting of members of few political parties and currently having 55% of the seats of the parliament, and the opposition party controlling in total 45% of the seats. Both factions have their opposing views on the matter. The majority coalition argues that in order to save human lives and stop the pandemic, we need to impose strict lockdowns, and that following the constitution and the legislation is important, but can temporarily be sacrificed or suspended in times of crisis. The opposition party has a different view and claims that adopted quarantine measures should be carefully tailored to the challenge, prioritizing respect to the rule of law and human rights, and emphasizing the necessity to comply with existing legislation. So, according to the rules of our debate, at the beginning, the majority coalition will have 20 minutes to present their position. After that, the opposition will continue with their argument, also having 20 minutes for their speech. Then, the parties will have the chance chance to exchange questions to each other, beginning with the opposition party posing questions to the coalition. Each question will take up to 2 minutes, and the coalition will have up to 5 minutes to reply. After that, the majority coalition will have their chance to ask counter questions to the opposition, and at the end, each party will have up to 10 minutes to present their final argument and close the plenary session. So with all of that, honorable members of the parliament, with this, I commence our plenary session and open the discussion of permissibility and legitimacy of restricting human rights due to COVID pandemics. Both parties have submitted their proposals in time, which have been duly registered by the Secretariat of the Parliament, and we now open the oral deliberations of the matter. Majority coalition, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. So the coalition wants to start the procedure. First of all, we must say that in February 2020, the world faced a disastrous and deathly disease. And it was unexpected, it was lightning-like, it was rigorous. No one could have known that something like that would happen. The world wasn't ready, both legally and economically. And we have to say that very soon after, the World Health Organization proclaimed this situation the world pandemic, which strictly imposes some obligations on the states. And a lot of countries have failed to make prompt and rapid measures and restrictions and impose restrictions in order to save people's lives. We will see during our speech how it influenced a lot of people in different countries, in different regions, with various legal and political systems. It's a disaster we haven't coped with right now, and we're still tackling it, we're still fighting with it, and we strongly believe that if the strict lockdown is imposed in Ukraine, and if the strict lockdowns were imposed in the other countries, which we would demonstrate by strengthening our arguments, the world would have a better place right now. The countries would be opened, the borders will be opened, and the state would function and get back to normal again.
It's important to note that no country was ready for such a threat. Actually, not leaving alone Ukraine. And there were and there are still no laws that regulate states' actions during the pandemic. The coalition actually stipulates that considers that the strict measures is the best way to protect our country from this pandemic, and we emphasize the importance of strict lockdown to protect our lives and to protect human lives, notwithstanding being followed by adaptive quarantine. So we cannot talk about rejecting the strict lockdown, but because the price is too high, and we should consider this as the only way to save lives and to save our economy, as we will deliberate later.
So, first of all, let's start with the right to life. We want to refer to the opposition party that we do not object that Ukrainian legislation and the constitution stipulates that the right to life is important, and we do not neglect international laws, and we do not neglect their importance. But talking about proportionality, talking about the price of people's life, we do consider that the price is very high, and we need to strive to save people's lives in the most rapid way, in the most rigorous reaction as possible. Because we believe that the right to life is of the highest value for every state, for every authority. That is why we consider and we do take into account that the right to life is enshrined in various treaties. For example, it's Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's also enshrined in different treaties, like the Convention on the People with Disabilities, in Convention on the Rights of Children. It is also enshrined and set forth in the Constitution of Ukraine under Article 3. We do realize it. And we do realize that in Article 8 of Ukrainian Constitution, we have the rule of law and the principle of the rule of law. But we have to say that as the coalition party, as the government, we believe that the primary goal of the rule of law is to defend the people's lives. It doesn't depend on whether that's formal or substantive theory. We think that the rule of law is the right to life.
And we strongly advocate for imposing strict restrictions in our country, since it's the most effective and the fastest way to protect Ukraine. Firstly, especially in the winter period, due to the fact that most of the hospitals are overcrowded and many inpatient beds also are crowded, there is a lackness. We believe that only by imposing the restriction, we can save our lives. Secondly, a person can be a transmitter of such a disease since there are no symptoms, and fighting with the enemy, if it's invisible, is much more harder. And we consider that waiting at home, stay at home for a while to live better life in future is the best idea in such situation. Also, the main argument that vaccination is not the reason to putting strict lockdown to an end, because Ukraine has very little access to the quantities of such vaccines actually. And mainly, all the vaccines are supposed to be given to people who are over 16 years old. However, in our hospitals are overcrowded with people who are much younger. We have a situation when the vaccines will be given to people who are already at home, who are staying at home, but we have a trouble with younger population. And that's why the strict measures is the best way to protect the lives of older people and younger people, elderly and younger people. So our position is to protect lives by imposing a strict quarantine measures, and we'll show later how the strict quarantine measures saved lives in many countries, and we want to do the same in Ukraine.
Moreover, if the health argument is not enough for you, it's really worth noticing that the vaccine takes 2 shots to be efficient, and it doesn't obviously mean that the person terminates to be a transmitter of the virus. So we want to refer to the opposition that we are not against adaptive quarantine as the final. But we think that firstly, we have to have strict lockdown while the vaccination is taking place and while we have the overcrowdedness in hospitals, and then we can move to adaptive quarantine as the consequence of it. Moreover, we need to bear in mind that adaptive quarantine has much more disastrous consequences on the mental health of humans. What we mean under it is basically that, you may say that people have lost jobs during the strict lockdown. That's true, but that happens everywhere, not just in Ukraine. The thing is that adaptive quarantine, people have unrealized hopes because they are sad that you have to sit at home for 3 weeks in a particular region, and they are hoping to return to their workplaces. They are hoping to renew their activity. But what if the government says, no, you have to sit 1 month more? Don't you think that it will be really detrimental for people in terms of psychological unreadiness, in terms of being hopeless? We do. Also, we strongly believe that strict lockdown is a vital strategic thing, and it is much more beneficial than adaptive quarantine.
Actually, now we would like to explain our position with examples from the different countries, and we'll show that restrictions is a better position, it's a better situation, and we'll show with fact that, we'll show how the different measures, whether it's a restrictive quarantine measures, whether it's a strict quarantine or whether it's adaptive quarantine, and we'll show the difference. We'll explain you how it was, and we'll show you what is better. We'll start with situation in Italy.
So, does the opposition still doubt that strict lockdown is necessary? Numbers don't lie. To strengthen our position and just to refer to the arguments that we have analyzed only just some region, some particular legal system, no, we didn't. We took countries with different political background, with different religious background, with different regional peculiarities. And if to start with Italy, we all know what happened there. We all saw those pictures where people were in metal coffins in military lorries. And it was dreadful. We do not want to happen this over and over again in Ukraine. Speaking about Italy, people were celebrating some national holidays, tourists were allowed, they didn't impose any strict lockdown right away. And what we saw, thousands of victims, hospitals are overloaded, Italy was craving for doctors from all over the world. Even Ukrainian doctors were sent there to help. When they saw this situation, and they were shown in Ukrainian news, their only message was, we have to impose the strict lockdown until it's too late, and we have no one to lose anymore. But then, what we see right now in Italy is that they are still under restrictive measures. There are still some things where people and not all cafes, not all regions are open. That means that, yes, they did impose strict lockdown, but it was much later, and it was too late, and they lost a lot of lives. So if we look at the diagram, we see that almost 96,000 of people died in Italy, just because they didn't impose strict lockdown in time. And if they did, just 21,000 could die. Do you see this difference? We clearly do.
Now, let's take a look at Great Britain. Actually, it has stood apart from other nations with its relaxed response to coronavirus, and it didn't impose the strict quarantine measures. And what do we have now? Because of that, we have a number of 121,000 compared to 23,000. And I suppose government of Great Britain admitted its mistake, and now strict quarantine measures are imposed. However, even now, in January 2021, they imposed the strict quarantine measures, and even despite the fact that there is a vaccine at this moment. So if such countries as Great Britain, that has access to large quantities of vaccines, still impose strict quarantine measures, what we do now in Ukraine? Do we have to make it easier for quarantine? Or actually, we believe that the strict quarantine measures in Ukraine should be imposed until most of the people have a vaccine. And in our reality, it is not impossible in a closer future.
Okay, and let's look at the third country, which is Turkey. We chose it just as an opposing country to those where the state did not impose strict lockdown at once. So, the Turkey had the most fast-growing outbreak of virus of COVID-19. It was much larger than China. It was much larger than the UK. And what did the Turkey do? They imposed strict lockdown right away. Turkey is a state famous for its one of the most severe measures in the world as their response to COVID-19. So what happens there? Basically, local people couldn't go out for 3 months during weekends. they still have a curfew from 9 p.m. In the evening of Friday till 6 a.m. in the morning of Monday. So all the shopping malls are closed. All the markets are closed. Local people cannot go out even on weekends after 9 p.m. So what do we see in Turkey? This gave the result. Very soon, on the 1st of March, we hope to hear the decision of the local authorities and of the government of Turkey that those restrictive measures will be taken down, most of them, because such severe lockdown, such strict lockdown was so efficient that they can now take most of the measures away, and they can now work with tourists. They can still draw a lot of tourists to their country, and people can move freely. And what we see that just 28,000 people died in Turkey. Compare those numbers with Great Britain and Italy.
Now let's take a look at some more countries. And here we get Norway, Finland, and Denmark. Actually, they were playing the same game, and here results. But we would like to put a special emphasis on Sweden, that actually has been famously relied on some voluntary measures, actually. And from the beginning, they allowed public gatherings of up to 50 persons. And now, step by step, the government has tightened its belt, actually tightened the quarantine measures. But what we have, this number is actually 12,000 of persons actually died, and 10,000 persons could be saved if the quarantine was much more stricter than it was in Sweden at those time. But now we have that Sweden actually rolled up new restrictive measures in Sweden, but we would like to emphasize that even now, when they imposing additional restrictive measures, this life couldn't be saved. Actually, 12,000 people died, and this number could be 10,000 lesser than it is. But we actually anticipate that the opposition will argue that economy actually sacrifices in such situation when there is a strict quarantine. And we would like to show you this slide. It is actually comparison of gross domestic product of second and the third quarters. Actually, as you see, countries as Singapore, Germany, this country where actually the strict quarantine measures were imposed, and in comparison with Brazil and Italy, where adaptive quarantine actually was imposed. And we'd like to show you that this actually graphics show you that even between the countries that impose the strict quarantine measures and the countries that impose the adaptive quarantine measures actually have the same damage to their economy. But one thing is not the same, actually. The people's life. Actually, countries that impose the strict quarantine measures have much more less deaths in their country, and they don't have to be as actually people of their country. And economic impact wasn't so high, and there is no such high difference between Italy with its adaptive quarantine and Singapore with its strict measures, and with Germany compared to Brazil. Actually, here we have to measure all the situation, not in money, but in people's life.
And we would also like to emphasize that, Sweden used the theory of herd immunity, and they believed that voluntary measures will just lead to herd immunity and the quarantine will disappear. But don't you think that herd immunity is inhumane, is unethical? We do. And to sum up our speech today, we would like just to finish with the expression of Kant, which clearly shows that people's lives are of the highest importance. Moreover, we do believe that probably the opposition will say that some of the rights were violated, some of the human rights were violated. But let's think about the EU. Ukraine is still in the red zone for the EU. So our people cannot enter the countries of the European Union. And what we see that Ukraine has been having adaptive quarantine so far. And now we do have adaptive quarantine, but we're still in the red zone. We're still not allowed to enter the EU using tourist visas. Isn't it also kind of, in your opinion, violation of freedom of movement? Well, we believe that the EU takes measures just to save people's lives and to make sure that Ukrainian citizens are not a threat and that Ukraine does take vaccine. So, if Europe closed borders for us, if Europe closed borders for other states, we do not think that we can say about violation of human rights to the freedom of movement. So the coalition considers that the strict lockdown is a must for now, and then we can proceed with adaptive quarantine. Thank you.
Thank you to honorable representatives for expressing their position. And I would now like to invite the opposition party to express their views, their arguments. Honorable representatives, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the preliminary argument, please pay attention to the fact that our colleagues were talking about the strict lockdown, but they didn't even have a mask in their hands. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mykola, and on behalf of the opposition party, I would like to invite you and welcome you on these debates regarding the intensity of the COVID-19 restrictions in the Ukrainian context. All our presentation is built on three main blocks. The first one relates to the governmental authority to introduce the restrictions in question, and I will present it. The second one would deal with the irrationality of the restrictions suggested by the majority coalition, and the last one would contain our suggestions about the quarantine. So, about the first block. As all of us may know, in Ukraine we have a very interesting document called the Constitution. And unfortunately, sometimes it seems like the majority coalition does not know about this document and the obligation this act imposes on them. By introducing the harsh quarantine measures, the government de facto restricts the freedom of movement, the freedom of assembly, the right to entrepreneurship, the right to labor, and many other rights and freedoms that do constitute the fundament for the democratic development of our nation. Article 64 of our Constitution enshrines one fundamental rule. The specific restrictions on human rights and freedoms may be established only under the condition of martial law or a state of emergency. The aforementioned rights and freedoms cannot be restricted by the arbitrary decisions of the government. But nevertheless, our majority coalition goes on suggesting the restriction of these rights without even introducing the state of emergency. Again, it is unlawful for the government to impose the restrictions of human rights without introducing the state of emergency. We do not have any state of emergency, and we know nothing about the possible governmental plans to introduce it. So we can take for granted the fact that our government has no authority to impose the lockdown now. The coalition's position that following the Constitution and the law on emergency situations is important, but they do temporarily sacrificed, they can be sacrificed in times of crisis, goes beyond all bounds. Under Article 19 of our Constitution, the bodies of state power are obliged to act only on the grounds within the limits of authority and in the manner envisaged by the Constitution. When the coalition asserts that it is okay to break the Constitution, it is unacceptable. As the citizens of Ukraine, we shall not tolerate
any arbitrary acts of government, even if they have the legitimate aim. Such words and decisions of the majority coalition shatters all that tiny hopes of the last years about establishing the rule of law in this country, which would have the very serious repercussions not only for us, but also for those who come after us and for those who come after them. The rule of law is the shield that guards the democracy and the sustainable development as the guarantee of our prosperous future, and disregard to it shall be not only slap in the face of our citizens, but also the great disrespect for our international commitments that defines us as the democratic state. Rechtsstaat, am I right, the honorable ladies and gentlemen from the majority coalition? By acceding to the European Convention on Human Rights and to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Ukraine has undertaken the obligation to derogate from its obligations only when there is some officially proclaimed public emergency. By acceding to them, we have promised Ukrainian citizens and the international community that the human rights and our international obligations are not just empty words. But the lockdown the majority tries to lobby is contrary to these obligations, as it is clear that Ukraine did nothing for the quarantine measures to comply with Article 15 of the European Convention and with Article 3 of the ICCPR. And one should understand that the obligations could not have burdened our authority. It was not hard to introduce any state of emergency or notify the respective bodies of the international organs about the derogation. It is mere governmental negligence and failure to comply with simple requirements of treaties. And unfortunately, that will also have repercussions. As the ECHR mechanism acts to the full extent, we can expect thousands of potential judgments where Ukraine would be found guilty of non-compliance with its obligations, and it would be quite a serious burden for the Ukrainian budget. I hope that this our position would be heard by the majority coalition, and the decision to introduce the lockdown would be reversed in order to maintain the legality in Ukraine. However, we cannot be sure that the majority coalition would listen to the arguments about legality. So, what should we do next? How could our citizens be sure that their rights and freedoms will not be violated by their own government? The question is simple. Under Article 55 of the Constitution, the rights and freedoms shall be protected by the courts. And it is very interesting because the Constitutional Court has already reviewed the lawfulness of the restrictions, but due to the rapid change of the governmental act regarding the restrictions, it was made to close the case. However, due to the heightened scrutiny because of the possible violation of human rights and freedoms, there was quite a serious possibility that the court would have struck down that act. And is there any sense to adopt the new act, even a harsher one, if in a few weeks it can be struck down? We believe there is no. However, we can presume that the mentioned arguments would not be enough for the government, so we will proceed to the arguments why the strict lockdown will bring us more harm than good. Thank you, everyone, and I would like to welcome my colleague Anna.
Thank you, Mykola, and thank you, dear coalition, for your position. And I would like to talk mostly about the economic issue. So, first of all, the coalition told us that the economic crisis cannot be omitted in any case, because this is pandemic and we cannot just help the economy to grow it. But I would like to say that we can lead this crisis to a total disaster, like default, for example, or we can try to take all of the possibilities that we have to look at our needs and at real threats, to look into the reality and try to come up with the best solution of what we can. We cannot track our citizens like China, for example. We do not have very strong institutions, for example, and this is our reality. But for the other case, we can do something. Okay, let's look at the pandemic. Our Ministry of Health thought that for today, 1,160,000 people are recovered from the coronavirus. It means that they gain their immunity. So all at all, we are all gaining the collective immunity. So we are not at the same conditions as we were at the beginning of the pandemic. Now it's different. The coalition says that, okay, now we have this quarantines that are not very strict, but we have a strict lockdown. And what we have, we don't we don't solve the problem at all, and we cannot do that. Any country in the world can say that, okay, and from now we have zero people who can even potentially have coronavirus, because this is issue, and we cannot solve it like close our eyes and just put this strict lockdown for every part of Ukraine. Next is that a pandemic is not spreading like the same in all the regions. In some regions there is ups and in some regions there is downs of that pandemic. That means that if we want truly to do our best, and as a coalition said, and we totally agree with you on that point, that human life should be the biggest value. And we also value human life the most, and that is why we want to look at that problem in more complex way, because pandemic is not just about coronavirus. It's also about other spheres that are affected by the pandemic. It's about lives, human lives in general, and we cannot just seclude pandemic and say, okay, we put a strict lockdown on that, and other lives that can be affected, we just say, okay, we will solve that problem later on. Okay, so we understand that in different regions there is different spreading of coronavirus, and we cannot just say that in all regions we need this strict lockdown. Another is about people, and that mostly people are used to the coronavirus. We are not afraid as much as it was at the beginning of the pandemic, because now even looking to the strict lockdown in January for weeks, we see that people were still meeting, still doing their things. A lot of cafeterias were working. It wasn't just a case then you put the strict lockdown and people were sitting homes. Yes, some of them adjusted to it. Some of them just say, okay, no matter. I don't want to do that. And how you will track them? How do you expect to force people sit at home? Yes, okay, you can force the business not to work. And then what you have? You have a big hole in the budget, because there is no taxes if business is not working in a normal way. Okay, let's look at our economy. Now, Ministry of Finance says that 10% is like our unemployment rate is up to 10%, when in developed countries there is up to 3% in like normal state. So we have such a problem with unemployment. Okay, what next? Also, like UN Office of Humanitarian Affairs thought that 80% of households in Ukraine has lose part of their incomes, or lose their incomes at all. So they are living for their savings. 40% of them were fired. At least one member of the household were fired because of this pandemic. Let's look at our outside investors. What are the biggest investors of Ukraine? It is its own citizens that are living abroad, gaining money there and putting this money into Ukraine to their families. Now they are all here in Ukraine, yes, because policies of other countries say that please foreigners go home, something like that. And now we have a lot of people who are unemployed, who who have no savings because 1 year is passed here in Ukraine and they need to have something to do. What is the worst situation? It's when you have no possibility to gain money to supply your basic needs. And do you think that if people were just without food or with little money, with no healthy food, would they think about restrictions, about their possible health problem with pandemic, or would they just do anything to get the money, protest, rising criminality and everything like that? Because if we just close our eyes on economic issues and think only about the pandemic, it won't work like that. Because pandemic, we need to think of it in the whole system. Okay. And one more about tax holidays. Even if we have such tax holidays for business, and you can say that, okay, it's not a very big issue, we can help our economy. But economy and business is not just about taxes. They need to pay their workers, they need to pay rent, and so on and so forth. And if we destroy economy, we don't have more money to pay for the people who are also in the hospitals. About the pandemic, our hospitals and health system is not overloaded. We have no data that now we, as my colleague Mykola said, that now we have some extra state and like all of our hospitals are full and overcrowded. It isn't. And as I said, we gain the collective immunity. And in different regions, we see different spreading of pandemic. So maybe it's not a good idea to put the strict lockdown just because we want to solve a problem at all. Maybe it won't solve at all. Maybe we need to think of more adaptive one, to adapt our restrictions to the real threats and real needs of the people and to the people's reaction. So the best way is just to give people possibility to stay afloat, not to think about where to get food. Thank you very much, and I would like to give the speech to my colleague Anna-Maria.
Thank you, Anya. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we understand that public administration is a very hard work, and we are grateful that the majority coalition is ready to have such a debate and is trying to find a compromise. Okay. Compromise. So we would like to present you our vision of the quarantine, which comprise 4 stages. Step 1, taking into account everything mentioned above and reject the idea of the strict quarantine. Step 2, to draw out a new project of the adopting quarantine that would be consistent with the principle of proportionality. Step 3 is to introduce measures to protect most vulnerable groups of people. And step 4 is to concentrate not on the quarantine measures, but on the process of vaccination. We were to heard that yesterday the first person in Ukraine had been vaccinated. And it would be great if the government put a bit more efforts into the fast spreading of the vaccine. So we want to make a conclusion. According to the Human Rights Watch position, restrictions should be grounded as proportionate and necessary for the reacting to the specific peril under specific circumstances. Professor of criminal law Vyacheslav Navrotsky had a very nice quote which in English could be read as follows: "There is no need to use a sledgehammer to crack a walnut." Introducing the strict lockdown in Ukraine is the same as to trying to crack a nut with sledgehammer. No correlation between the peril and the reaction. We hope that the majority would take all mentioned facts into account and change their minds. Thank you.
I thank the both parties for presenting their positions. That was quite enlightening, and now I would propose that we move to the questions. So the opposition party, you can take a microphone and please pass another microphone to the coalition. to the majority coalition. And now you have an opportunity to ask the first question.
That you stated that in order to save as many lives as possible, a strict lockdown must be a solution. But the statement is actually empty. All Ukrainian people would be grateful if you conducted at least a fact check before making such important statement. And at least you should take into account the Oxford University. Jane? Okay.
Yes, please.
As I said, my name is Marta, and the first question to Majority Coalition Party is that you stated that in order to save as many lives as possible, strict lockdown must be a solution. But this statement is actually empty because all Ukrainian people would be grateful if you conducted at least fact check before making such important statement. You should at least take into account the Oxford University statistics, which says that our March-April restrictions were one of the strictest in the world in context of correlation to the number of infected people. So the question arises, how can you explain the great difference between your statement and grounded researches which clearly state that providing strict quarantine measures are more trouble than it worth? And what you ground your position? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. First of all, we would like to know that having your mask in your pocket is the same effective as adaptive quarantine. And actually, we can explain such a spread of coronavirus in March and May because due to the fact that despite the restrictions, many people went to church. Actually, we had religion holidays in our country, and due to that fact, that was a spread of this coronavirus. But you should estimate the fact that without strict restriction in March, our country wasn't actually ready. Our healthcare system wasn't ready to protect us, and actually that strict restrictions, were vital in our situation in order to prepare our healthcare system, prepare our hospitals, and to build additional actually places for people.
Okay. So I will now invite the second representative of the opposition party to pose the second question to the majority coalition.
Okay, thank you. My name is Yuri. I'm a representative of the opposition party. You already mentioned in your speech that we need a strict lockdown before we get some vaccine for everybody in Ukraine. So my question is it rational to use the funds to stabilize economy when we can use it for vaccine, for information campaign about their effectiveness and about social distancing and so on? How do you think?
So we need to emphasize that Ukraine has special funds to tackle COVID-19, and your argument about taxes is not related to the truth, because people do pay taxes, and taxes go on various taxes go into various fields. But according to the state budget, we have a separate fund as a speedy reaction to COVID-19. So these are not the money that are used for the economy; these are separate money.
Thank you, representative of the majority coalition. Member of the opposition party, please ask your question.
My name is Elzara, and dear ladies and gentlemen, my last question would be about my own personal pain about the Crimea and the occupied territories. So, as a Crimean Tatar, I know that due to your restrictions, all my friends and all my people are blocked in the occupied territories. They are already feel like in jail in Russia, and you give them no choice to come back. In fact, you tear them of Ukraine even more. And by the way, the last quarantine had me locked down in Crimea without the right to cross the border and return to mainland Ukraine. So my question is, do you believe that it would be fair for our people from occupied territories if you adopt the strict lockdown one more time?
So, thank you for your question. And the answer would be this, the following. So, of course, Crimea and Donbass are Ukraine, and they belong to Ukraine. But we do not have control over those territories, and the Russian Federation has effective control over Donbass. And we have the state of occupation, which has been proven by the Prosecutor General of the International Criminal Court. And it has been proven by the European Court of Human Rights. And we have to say that due to the fact that we do not possess effective control over these territories, neither local authorities nor NGOs have access to facts what happens on those territories. We do not possess information whether there are enough masks, whether people keep social distance, whether there are any restrictive measures there. We do not have this data. We cannot get this data, as well as many others, for example, on ecological situation, etc., etc. So we find it reasonable to make people who come from occupied territories like Donbass and Crimea to sit and to have isolation period of 2 weeks, because we didn't have the access to the data, and we cannot make sure that these people are not transmitters. Moreover, you're not obliged to sit during 2 weeks. You can pass COVID test. And we do realize that it is a burden for people who come from those territories, probably due to economic issues. But there is special funding, and there are NGOs which finance COVID tests for people who come from Donbass and Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you to the opposition party for their questions, and thank you as well to the majority coalition for answering them. And now we will turn the table and offer the majority coalition the possibility to ask questions to the opposition party. So the majority coalition, please ask your first question.
So, in your speech, you propose to vaccine people, but is the effectiveness of vaccine proven actually?
And please just try not to answering with simple yes.
Well, it was very interesting question, and I plan to answer yes, but I think that we should all remind the fact that in your speech, you mentioned the fact that the vaccination is effective. You mentioned that. So I know nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For the majority coalition, your second question?
So, the second question, well, we had such an argument that there are people who work abroad and they cannot return to the European Union due to lockdown. But first of all, don't you think that they cannot return not due to the strict lockdown in Ukraine, but due to the thing that the EU closed borders with Ukraine and we are in red zone for the EU? And don't you think that adaptive quarantine in regions such as, for example, we do have it right now, we do have red zone in the Karpatska Oblast, in the Karpatska region, and Ivano-Frankivsk region, where everything is closed, so all restaurants, all cafes, but just for takeaway. I actually think that it is a sort of discriminatory matter, and it is sort of discrimination, and also it is sort that these are discriminatory measures. That the thing is that the economic situation in these regions is becoming worse as well, and your argument about economies falling apart. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will begin answering and then my colleague will continue. Well, first of all, I would emphasize on the importance of economic issue because, of course, that people are here, and of course, we cannot, for example, influence on the politics of EU. Yes, and that is why we need to think of them here now in Ukraine. And if we just block the oxygen of the business in Ukraine, you think that that people would find a place to work. And of course, you say the strict lockdown is a good and effective way. But from the other case, can you truly track the people? Can you truly influence on that situation? As you think that strict lockdown will make people sit home, or it will just make the business falling into even bigger problems, and people will still doing what they want because it's not the beginning and people are used to it. Yes, so
And I want to add, you mentioned that our citizens can go abroad because you close borders for them, but it's not true, because if you have a permission to work in EU countries, you can go. But our citizens can go abroad and work because you closed our borders. How they could do so, like Mikhail Saakashvili do? I'm not sure they would do so.
Okay, thank you. Our last question is actually, firstly, we would like to know that actually economic crisis could not be omitted in times of pandemic. And our main partner, actually European Union, closed the border to us. And actually, while we are in the red zone for European Union, we cannot have actually free trade with them, and we cannot actually, not a free trade, we cannot actually have sufficient trade with those countries. And actually the main idea is to stay home for a while, to lower actually those statistics of deaths, those statistics of new actually people with positive results of coronavirus, and actually to be again not in the not in the red zone, but actually to resolve issue with the European Union. And the main question is whether it's actually more logical to stay at home for a while, actually to deal with coronavirus in Ukraine in order to have again sufficient traffic with other countries and with the world.
Yes, and actually, thank you for a question. We do have a strict lockdown, and we do sitting homes, and now we have our situation that is not solving. And now we need to, your words even emphasis on the importance of economic issue, because if we will even more weaker here in Ukraine economically, what we should do with all of that people, and to make it adopted quarantine measures is much more not discriminative, because we need to think in complex way about the picture which we see, not just about the pandemic. And of course, as I taught, if people are hungry, they won't think about the health issues that potentially can be dangerous for them.
One second. Thank you, colleagues. I'll continue. So, Sergey, you mentioned that our main problem for economy is the absence of our economic contacts with the European Union. Okay, it is well, we accept it. But don't you think that if we don't have any economic context with the European Union, you as the majority coalition should look for another opportunities for our citizens to raise our economy. And by imposing the strict quarantine measures, the lockdown, you're just making a headshot to them.
I also wanted to add that EU doesn't open the borders for us, not just because we don't have strict restrictions or strict quarantine measures. They don't open border because we have a lot of infected people, and strict quarantine measures, as we can revise to my statistic and fact check, which we made, and you can also made via internet, that strict measures doesn't equal to the lower of infected people. So yeah, thank you.
If this is always the questions, then now I will invite the majority coalition for their final argument.
So we have heard the opposition party, and we have heard all the arguments that they gave to us. And we would like to respond to some of them in our final argument. First of all, we do not really know which fact check you did, but we used the official data by the Ministry of Health, which proved that strict lockdown in January was efficient. Before January, we had about 10,000, sorry, we had a lot of cases, but after strict lockdown in January, we had about 3,000 cases a day. So it has been officially proven that strict lockdown in January was efficient in Ukraine. Second of all, we have to add that, the economic crisis is a thing and it happens everywhere due to pandemic. It's a global thing. It's a global issue. But on the other hand, we do believe that adaptive quarantine poses a bigger mental threat to people, as people are not sure, as they are hopeless. Moreover, we do believe that people sit without jobs, and strict lockdown can give people abilities to develop, because strict lockdown opens, there are a lot of courses, there are a lot of universities, there are a lot of NGOs which are active and helping people in strict lockdown as well. And adaptive quarantine, they are waiting for their enterprise to open. They can wait for a month, they can wait for 2. How long should they wait? No one knows. Thirdly, we clearly saw that the opposition is neglecting the life of people, because all those arguments about economy, about people being hungry, well, is it better to see your relatives in coffins? Is it better to go to the cemetery and not being able just to say goodbye to them, but not have enough money? Moreover, if you have a lot of possibilities to develop. So we ask you to think about these words, which have a really emotional thing to all Ukrainians. And the last thing that we would like to emphasize is that, Ukraine hasn't made a derogation to the ECHR and to ICCPR. But the thing is that, as many countries didn't. Italy did not, Spain did not, France did not. Let's think why. So if we take the countries who made derogations to ECHR, these are countries like Romania, these are countries like North Macedonia, these are countries like Latvia. Why did other countries, why didn't they make a derogation? We want to emphasize that according to legal argument, there is no exact opinion that the derogation should be formal. The ECHR, there was a case, Turkey versus Greece, where ECHR took its position, and it said that it cannot clearly define whether this argument that derogation, formal requirement of derogation is necessary, and if such formal requirement hasn't been made, it nullifies derogation. So there are a lot of legal doctrines, there are a lot of positions, and we cannot fully rely to your argument, because as we see, many countries, many democratic countries did not make a derogation. Ukraine as well. But does it mean that we shouldn't protect people's lives? No, we have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Representative of the Majority Coalition. I will now invite the representatives of the opposition party to present their final argument for our today's debate.
I'm grateful for the honorable lady for the closing arguments, and I'll try to answer them shortly. The first point about our data and the data you mentioned about, which is originated from the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, I would like to answer that our data originates from the Oxford University. And here is the question for our constituents. Who do you rely on more? On the Ministry of Health of Ukraine or to the Oxford University? This is the first point. The second point, you mentioned that the adopting quarantine imposes a threat for our voters because they know nothing about their future. And the lockdown is the great possibility because they can just use, for example, Coursera or Prometheus and so on. My dear friends, I don't see any logic, and I would like our constituents to emphasize on this issue. The third point, you mentioned that why should Ukraine do a derogation when Italy and other countries did no derogation? And here is the issue of the rule of law. And here is, I think, the principal issue of the rule of law. We should not look to Italy and to the other states of the European Union, of Africa, of Asia, and so on. We are Ukraine, we are state, and we should have rule of law. Please adhere to the rules. About the formal derogation, the Honorable Lady, please open the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 15, and check it again. It is written that the derogation should be communicated to the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. It is formal derogation. This is the point. So, I hope that everyone enjoyed our debate. And on behalf of the opposition party, it was a very great honor to take part in them. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Representative. And as the Speaker of this great Parliament, who by default has to remain neutral, I will not express my own position on the matter. But with this, I would like to close the debate as the Speaker of the Parliament and provide maybe some final remarks as a teacher of the course. Yeah?
Probably nothing back.
No. So I would like to thank all the students who took part in preparing the course, whether you were presenting or helping or asking questions or answering questions. Thank you all. This was quite great. The debate remained more or less civilized. There were some provocative comments, some ad hominem attacks, but as it often happens in the parliaments, you remained within the boundaries of the parliamentary traditions. So thank you all. Thank you to all the listeners and viewers of our debates. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all panelists and to Taras, who has been moderating this session.